Here we go. So we're recording now. Okay, so yeah, so just for those of you who aren't familiar with who we are, so I'm Bianca Praino, so I'm the founder of Praino Careers. So I come from a career consultant background. I've worked in education for over 10 years, and I basically set up my own career consultancy, just supporting foreign nationals with how to navigate their career in a UK context. So anything to do with applications, CVs, cover letters, interview skills, and also just understanding the UK labour market is what I cover with my clients. And yeah, I'm lucky to be doing this event. I feel really fortunate with Cheryl. And yeah, it's going to be the first event that we're doing together. And yeah, you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Thanks for the introduction, Bianca. Hi, everyone. I'm happy to be here. I'm Cheryl. I'm originally from the US, but I live in Italy now. And my business is based in Italy. It's called Cheryl Obal and Associates. And basically, I specialized in culture and with specifically on how to work and live effectively together. Whenever there's a cross-border collaboration or some sort of project together between different countries, I'm like a consultant and trainer to help smooth over those relations. And so that's been my focus, and I'm happy to be here. So I hope I can be of help to all of you, and I'm happy to get started.
I'm sure you will. Yeah, so basically just before we get started, it'd be really good for us to know who is in the room, so to say, with us. So if you could put in the chat, if you can see where the chat box is, and just let us know where you are in the world at the moment. So where is your current location? So I'm currently in Spain, Cheryl's in Italy. And where are you originally from? And what is your current status? So it'd be good to know if you're working at the moment, or if you're looking for work, or if you're a student. And also if you could let us know how confident you are with your interview skills at the moment. So on a scale of 1 to 5, where 1 is that you're not confident at all and 5 is that you're very confident, it'd be great to get a bit of an idea about where you are on that scale. So yeah, just if you find your way towards the chat, and then if you could put your responses in, that would be great. And Cheryl will read them out.
So far, we have just Pakistan and me, Italy, which you already said.
Yeah.
So go ahead, feel free to enter your country in there in the chat box and put your number. How confident do you feel? Okay, we have India, 2.5 from Satrangi. That's the only answer so far with a number in it. People are feeling shy or still thinking about it, perhaps. I don't think I'll ever feel 100% confident about job interviews. South Africa.
Ongoing like process, a lot of learning from your previous interviews. Yeah, no matter what stage or level you're at, if you have to go for interviews, it's a constant learning curve.
That's right. We have a 5.
Oh, very confident.
That's great. We have a 2 from South Africa. We have a 4. Okay, that's good. Oh, you're moving to Poland next week. That's Daniel. That sounds exciting.
Great, Daniel. Okay, so yes, we've got a bit of a range.
That's all as far as answers so far. Looks like that's it. So we're, yes, wide range.
Yeah, so thanks very much for that. It's really good, yeah, to get an idea of what your current situation is for us, for the session. So basically today we are going to cover, well, my side of things, I'm going to cover types of interview formats in the UK, how to prepare for competency-based interviews. So some of you might already be aware of this type of interview format. It's one of the most popular used in the UK. And top tips for do's and don'ts for interviews. And then Cheryl is going to cover UK culture and communication, etiquette around interview, and also job search tips as well. And then we'll have some time for Q&A as well. So you can ask questions throughout, but also we'll have some time at the end for you to ask any questions that you have and pick our brains. Okay, so why do you think employers conduct interviews? So just to get your insight into this, so if you just could write your answer in the chat again, why do you think they actually interview candidates?
Go ahead and put it in the chat if you have an idea. What's the word that jumps out in your mind about why employers do interviews? To get to know more about you, yes, your skill sets. To ensure the candidate is a match for the role, yes, true.
Yeah, so basically it's around suitability, attitude, fit, and motivation. So really, I'm sorry, there's a mark there. I don't know if you can see it as well, the little blue mark. I'm not sure how to get rid of that, but anyway, so suitability for the role that you're applying for, what your attitude is like. So this comes down to your personal attributes, your personality type, and what is the impression that you give in terms of your professionalism and so on. The fit is related to the fit for the company and the company culture, which is really significant for employers, obviously, and motivation. So what is your motivation for applying for that specific role and that specific company? And again, this is something that is unique to you. Each individual candidate will have a different reason for why they're motivated for that job. So that is really, really important for you to know and to get across. But one of the main things, and a key message from my part today, if you remember anything, it's fail to prepare, prepare to fail. So this is something I've bared in mind when I've prepared for interviews myself, for my own career and for clients as well. It's all in the preparation. You've got to remember that they've given you the interview because they know your application demonstrated that you could do the job. So the interview is simply for you to further convince them of that. So they want you to do well in the interview. They've given you that opportunity. So it's all in the preparation and how you communicate your suitability, your fit, and your motivation. So in terms of UK interview formats, so there's the traditional, most used, well, pre-COVID, face-to-face. So face-to-face interviews, they can be one-on-one, but they're most commonly with more than one person on the panel to get that aggregated judgment about the interviewee. So knowing your interviewers is really important. So if you're going for a role and you're getting interviewed by someone who would be your potential manager, it's really important that you're aware of that, and in terms of how you again communicate your understanding of what the expectations are of the role. And body language awareness is really, really key, and I know Cheryl's going to cover a lot more about that in her side of things. And being personable, so remembering that you're not on trial, remembering to smile, to have eye contact, and to be a person and to build a rapport. And it's amazing how quickly you can do that through small talk, injecting some humor. It's really, really key, and it's a very common thing in the UK, and it's kind of expected as well, and it makes everyone more comfortable and at ease, including you. So it's really, really important to do that and be personable. Phone interviews are actually really an important part of a screening process for a lot of employers. So this is where they've reviewed your application, and before they might give you a face-to-face or a more formal interview, they will give you a call, and you might be put on the spot. You might not expect the call at all. So you need to be able to remember which jobs you've applied for, speak clearly and listen carefully to the questions that they're asking you. Know your why and your unique selling point. So that's your USP. So, again, why have you applied for that specific job? Is it because you have the specific qualification they've asked for, or is it have they asked you to be able to speak more than one language and you can speak the other language? So really knowing how to communicate your worth and your value and your USP in a phone interview is really, really important for getting you through to the next stage of the process. And then we've got remote and virtual interviews, which have become a lot more common since COVID. And this is what most employers and recruiters are using now. It's also a lot more cost efficient for them. So remember to check your tech. So yeah, we're all human and we can all make errors with that side of things. But remember, find out what platform they're going to use. Is it Zoom? Is it Microsoft Teams? Is it Skype? And make sure you have the app on your laptop or on your computer before you start the session. Check your microphone as well, and also check your camera so all that's working, and focus on building a personal connection. So this is more difficult to do remotely, obviously, because you don't have the face-to-face body language language, and it's a different format altogether, but it is still possible to build that rapport and to have that small talk. So relax a bit and remember that's probably even more significant for remote and virtual interviews. So the last one is a video. So I don't know if anyone's had one of these, but it's a pre-recorded video interview format. So I know Cheryl you weren't aware of this when we spoke today.
I haven't heard of it.
It's very common, and basically you decide when you want to start the recording. So you get sent the link, you start it, and you're expected to answer a series of questions, and then you stop recording at the end, and then that goes to the employer, and they watch it back, and then again they will let you know if you're successful. It's normally a bit of a screening process as well, similar to the phone, and then they would invite you for a more remote interview, which is live. But something to bear in mind for video interviews is, rehearsing and reflecting. So, videoing yourself, practicing a few questions, watching that back, and then being aware of things that you weren't aware of initially. So I know that I can say quite a lot, and I try very hard not to, but I only know that because I've watched myself back as part of self-reflection, and I know that that's something that I need to stop doing. So yeah, just said it again. So also preparing for questions for the video interviews, for different types of questions, and understanding that there will be a mixture. So also remembering to maintain your professional attire, dress as you would for a face-to-face or remote interview for your video one, and make sure that your background is suitable, and you're not going to get interrupted as well, because you only get one chance, and you want to make sure that you do make a good impression. So those are the main 4 types of interviews for the UK. And some of you may have already experienced 1 or 2 or more of those. So in terms of preparing, so this is basically about you. So the things that you need to be able to communicate. So you've already, again, got the interview. They have your CV, they have your cover letter. So how else can you prepare? So preparing for your story is really important. So what is your narrative? What are your career goals and ambitions? How does that align with why you've applied for that job? Why you're a good candidate? What's your motivation again? Reflecting on all these things, and you can actually create a mind map like this for yourself before an interview, and you can map out what your skills are, what are the relevant projects that you've worked on that are related to the job, and this will really help you feel more confident and prepared telling your story and getting across what your why is. And then preparing for researching the organization, and this is one of the things that employers and recruiters feed back to me most often, is that the candidates have not researched the organization. They haven't demonstrated that they really understand the company's vision, the values and ethics, which are different, and their objectives, which again are different to the vision. And they come from the vision, but they are slightly different. So the business objectives, what projects have they worked on? Where have they shown success? Also their social media presence. So not just looking at what they've put about themselves in the job advert, but also going onto their social media, LinkedIn, if they're on Instagram, Facebook, and really getting a sense of what image they're portraying about themselves. Who are their clients as well? So understanding who would you be required to work alongside as part of the role. That's very, very key, and that should be in the job advert, and something that you should pick up on and bring into your interview and how you answer the questions as well. So yeah, so that's for the kind of the preparation. And yeah, so Cheryl and I had a discussion about this earlier about everyone's got their nightmare interview question that they dread the most. And mine is, where would you see yourself in 5 years' time? That really gets me. I find it really difficult to know where I see myself in a year's time, never mind 5 years. So Cheryl, do you want to share what your nightmare question is?
Yes, my nightmare question, unfortunately, is usually the first question that's asked. It's more of a sentence. Tell me about yourself. And why I don't like this is because it's so vague and so open-ended that it could be about anything. And I wish they would be more specific. Tell me about your role in your previous job, or tell me about your biggest hopes and dreams, or tell me about the place you grew up, anything, rather than just tell me about yourself. I don't know how to answer that question because, it's so open and it's so vague. What's your biggest weakness?
Oh, that's a good one.
Yes, that's a difficult question to answer.
I always say to people that with that question, always turn it round into an area of development that you're developing. So if you say, oh, one of my biggest weaknesses is managing your time and taking on a lot of projects or tasks at the same time, you could turn that around and say, because you're very enthusiastic and you really always want to do a good job, and so you're working on that and you're blocking out your time to be able to manage your tasks, and always turn that question into an area for how you're developing on your weakness. And that's a really kind of sophisticated interview technique that I would recommend to use. Hopefully that's helpful.
Daniel says that any question that makes him feel blocked due to lack of flexibility in giving the answer. So maybe something that challenges you in terms of your language skill, and then you feel like, oh, suddenly I don't have the vocabulary to explain this particular answer. Yeah, that can be a challenge. I
think focusing on, I guess, the fact that you're doing an interview in a language that is not your native is quite impressive in the first place, and I think they will appreciate that. But also then just focusing on the content and then making sure that you're throwing in those buzzwords and the keywords that they've put in the job advert and that are required for the role. So that will be in how you prepare for the interview, and you're getting those words in, and your grammar and your there's difference between the fluency and the accuracy, obviously, when you're speaking a second language. But there's ways around that, and good on you for doing your second language.
It's very difficult to interview in a language that's not your first. So as Bianca said, the fact that you're doing it is already very impressive. So I think most people pretty much are flexible in their mind when they know that somebody's interviewing in a language that's not their first. I think they understand. I mean, at least I do. At least if somebody is interviewing in English, it's not their first language. I always give them a little bit of leeway,
Yeah. And I guess it's something, you remember they've already given you the interview knowing that, you're bilingual or multilingual, and you've obviously demonstrated a good level of English in your application to be given the interview. And most likely it's how you feel about yourself, and what we think about ourselves is usually never what other people are thinking about us. So that's a kind of self-conscious thing, maybe.
We are our own worst critics.
Yes. Okay, I'm gonna move on from this slide. She's kind of freaking me out a bit. So different types of questions. So tell us about yourself, which is Cheryl's nightmare one. Why have you applied for this position? Where do you see yourself in 5 years' time? So the reason why interviewers ask these questions is to identify your motivation, your aspirations, and your personal attributes. So this is more about you, and again, on a more personal but still professional level, and understanding, you understanding the role and having the knowledge of the company again, and how you fit in with their working culture and the company values and so on. So these are about you, and for every candidate these questions will be different, obviously, and this is where you can really get across your value and your unique value and how you would do that job differently to someone else. The most sophisticated interview techniques as well is when you can turn, like, tell us about yourself, when you can relate that to the job, so then you would end that question on, relating it to how your career aspirations at the moment in your life relate to you applying for that job. So really tying it in, always going back to the job or the company. That's a really refined approach that it would see you be successful. Also, these questions, so I don't know if any of you have seen or experienced these types of questions. So tell us about a time when you've had to communicate something complex, or give an example of when you have blah, blah, blah. So these are competency-based interview questions, very, very commonly used in the UK. And they are basically to give you the opportunity to evidence, your relevant experience and your skills through providing specific examples of situations where you've demonstrated the competencies that are required for the role. And again, these questions will be related to the skills that have been listed in the job advert. So they're not going to ask you competency-based questions on random competencies. They're actually in the advert. And a lot of the time, some interviewers or companies, they do actually tell you the competencies that they're going to be assessing you for. And you can find this information online for some companies. For example, I know that the Scottish Courts and Tribunal, they actually have a pack for interview candidates where they actually tell you what are the competencies and the behaviours that they're looking for. So yeah, you can be very strategic with how you prepare for these and how you're going to answer them. So just to clarify, so competency-based interview questions are, like I said, they're related to skills and also knowledge that that are reflected in your professional performance. So these are measurable in terms of your abilities, and identify how you actually have worked previously through the evidence and examples that you're providing. So a competency is more than just knowledge and skills. So it's so basically, like, communication skills is a very broad skill. So your communication skills might be that you can communicate in different languages. So you can adapt your communication style, your verbal communication and written, to fit different cultural and global contexts. So that's something that you're competent in, where someone else is not competent in that area. Someone that can just speak one language, for example. So it is also about demonstrating your impact. So this is quite a big thing in the UK as well, demonstrating your impact and your value, and where you have made a valuable contribution. They want to know where quantifying what you've done. Where have you made a company money? How have you met targets? How have you exceeded expectations? And yes, so this is all to do with the competency-based questions. And yeah. So just to give you a little quiz time. So there are 4 questions here that are competency-based. So if you could type in the chat what skill you think each question relates to. So the first one is, tell us a time when you have worked in a team to contribute to a shared goal. So what skill do you think that the interviewer is asking you to give an example for this one? You can just type it in the chat, or you can speak out if you want.
Right, so Pyle says team player, Satrangi also team player, very good. Yes, that's the correct answer.
Yeah. And what about the second one? Give an example of a time when you had competing deadlines to meet. What approaches or strategies did you take?
Yes, Elena, she says time management. Yes, very good. Can you prioritize? From Pyle, working under pressure, Satrangi. Very good, good answers.
Yep. And what about can you give an example of a time when you worked on a project or a piece of work and encountered a problem? Did we do that one? No.
So what would that be? You encountered a problem. So what skill did you use in that situation? Right, conflict and challenges, says Pyle. Mitigating roadblocks. Wow, what great vocabulary, Satrangi.
Yeah, so you get the idea. So there's so the first one, teamwork, second one, organizational or time management skills, then problem solving, and then communication and negotiation. It is important for me to highlight that there can be a bit of an overlap with this. So for example, the first one, it could also be communication skills as well, or negotiation. So you might have come across a challenge whilst working as part of the team, and then you had to negotiate or you had to communicate something complex or difficult to your team members. So it's always good to prepare more than one example. I would say minimum 2 examples when you're using competency-based interview questions to prepare. So if you have 2 or more examples, then you can just pull them out in the interview, and yeah, there can be an overlap. So that's something to be aware of. Okay, so the STAR method, I don't know if you know this or not. So this is how you answer competency-based questions. Some of you might have used this before, and it's what interviewers look for. So they expect you to use this when answering questions like tell me a time when, or give us an example of when, blah, 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 blah. So S stands for situation. So this is about being as specific as you can about the role and the organization that you're going to give an example of. So if you're a student or a recent graduate, you can give examples of when you were a student for a project that you worked on. You need to say what your degree was, what was the project, what was the module, when was it. You need to not assume that they know anything about the situation. And the task is what had to be done. So this is, a factual piece of evidence. Okay, this is what had to be done. We had to complete a group project and then deliver a presentation. And action is what you did to get the task done. And this is where you would elaborate on any challenges or problems that you came across, how you overcame them. You would integrate your skills, your personal attributes, so they get an idea of how you are as an employee, how you are as a graduate, how you are as a professional. So that's a really important part of a STAR answer. And then the last part is the R for result. So what was the outcome? Always stay positive with the outcome, even if it wasn't a positive outcome. Be diplomatic and put a positive spin on it. You can always do that. Because when I've done mock interviews and I've done this approach with clients, and they come to the result and they say something that gives any negative connotations, it's very off-putting and you don't get a good impression of the person. And so it's really important that you put a positive spin on the result. So just so you know, so the STAR technique, like I said, I mean, it's a quite a strategic approach to answering these types of questions, and it's a scoring system for the interviewer. So essentially they have a scoring sheet and you get graded on each answer, and it's whoever has the highest score at the end of the day gets the job. So it's important that you're that you're able to do that job, but then you're also able to get through the interview process. And there's quite a bit of controversy over that, because some people get nervous and some people aren't as good at interviews but would be good at the job. But again, it's just all in the preparation and coaching, and you'd be able to improve on your interview skills, no problem. So this is quite important to bear in mind about the weighting for each part of the STAR answer. So as you can see, the action part is 70% of your answer. So this is the part that they want to hear about what you did. And one of the main downfalls is when giving an example of a time when you worked in a team, which is most likely always going to come up. Teamwork, communication, and problem solving skills always come up. And when talking about working as part of a team, going into we did this, we did that, we did this. Of course, you were a we in that context, but they want to know what you did in that team. How did you work as part of that team? Were you the leader? Were you a good listener? Were you contributing ideas? Were you supportive? So yeah, very essential to understand this. And the interviewer knows this, so you need to make sure that you know this as well. So this is an example of a STAR answer. So it's a very rough example. I can just let you read it yourself. I don't need to read it out for you. Sorry again about that scribble there. So if you could read it and then just let us know when you've read it. If you could just type done in the chat once you've read it, so I know I can move on, because I know everyone reads at different paces. So okay, looks like everyone's done. Okay, so yeah, this is an example of for someone who's a student, but obviously you can relate it to jobs that you've done in different job roles, and you would just substitute the words, but hopefully it gives you an idea of how to actually plan for these types of interviews, and you would actually write out examples like this for competency-based questions, which you can get quite easily online for different skills. And it's, like I said, it's all in the preparation. And even if you don't have a competency-based interview, doing this preparing for interviews like this is going to make you so confident walking in there, or going in online, because you will have real life situations to evidence your skills and your values. So it's still a really good way to prepare for any type of interview. Okay, so my advice as well is so add another R on the end of star. So this is where you can add a reflective statement. So when I do mock interviews, I say to people, look, you've got the result, and then moving on to a reflective statement where you look back on the situation and you show that you've reflected on it. You can talk about what you learned from it, what you might have done differently. And this will really make sure that your answer is concise and succinct, and you finish it very succinctly, and they won't be able to probe you, and they really shouldn't probe you in a competency-based interview. If the interviewer is asking you to elaborate or tell us more, it means that you're not giving enough information. So this is a really good tactic to adopt. And a reflective statement would be something like this, for example. So, in hindsight, or looking back, I would do this and this differently. And then they really appreciate when you've shown that reflection and understanding of, how you would do things differently. It's all a learning curve. So the other top 4 tips I would say as well is identify the list of skills in the job advert. So like I said earlier, they don't expect you to guess what the skills are. The skills are listed in the job advert. And sometimes when you're invited for an interview, they tell you the behaviors and the competencies that they look for. So it's not a trick. It's not a guessing game. They're actually there for you. And then basically you would just go online and find competency-based questions for each type of skill, and then write 2 or 3 examples for each one with the star technique. Again, reflect on where your experience actually lies. So your work experience, if you've done volunteering, what is your education background? Have you done things extracurricular that you could bring in examples for? So really showing the breadth of your experience. I've been asked in an interview before, when I was giving too many examples of the job I was in at the time, they asked me if I could give another example of another job, because I was just giving examples of my recent job, which doesn't really show the breadth of my experience. So it's important that you can map that out and know where your experience lies. Again, write answers using the star, minimum 2 examples for each skill, and then that would give you way over enough content to pull things out in the interview. And mock interviews are really helpful. People really like to do those and get some feedback, and then be able to put into practice that feedback to improve their skills. And just recording yourself as well. So I've done that, when I've had to prepare, if I've had a presentation to deliver as well, I'll just record myself, watch it back. Yeah, it's a bit cringing. No one likes to watch back their own recording. However, it's so important for being aware of your body language, your speech, you know, all the things that you otherwise wouldn't be aware of. And it does improve your skills, your interview skills and your performance. So that's a huge piece of advice I would recommend. And from my personal experience, it worked really well. And for people I've supported, it worked really well for them as well. Yeah, so other thing is the questions to ask interviewers. So this is where some people can fall down. It's difficult to think of questions to ask and appropriate ones as well. You know, as I work with a lot of internationals, they don't always know what is appropriate to ask, which is completely understandable. I've had interviews in other countries in Asia, and I wasn't sure of what to ask, what to ask them. So questions around, you know, learning and development opportunities, or who would you be required to work with as part of the role? You know, what are the main challenges that the company are facing? So, you know, again, just showing interest in the role and the company, and you can't really go wrong there. So thinking about 2 or 3 questions to ask, so you prepare them in advance. And one of the you know, things you could do in an interview, which is quite sophisticated, and shows that you're quite experienced with interviews, is when you follow up with a question about something that they've mentioned throughout the interview. So if they've talked to you about the role, or given you some information, you know, write down, you know, a note about that and ask them a question towards the end, and they'll realize that you were listening to them. And it's quite a good way to, again, you want to really try and create a discussion from the questions that you're asking as well. So making sure you're asking open questions as well, that don't require just the one word answer. So just general do's and don'ts for interviews. So things like asking about salary, holidays, or sponsorship is not the done thing in the UK, because it doesn't really tell them that you're interested in the role in the company. It's more about the conditions, and it's just the way that things are in the UK. That it's not appropriate in that context. So try to stay away from asking questions specifically about sponsorship. There's other ways you can find out if they have a sponsor license. Don't be a robot. So don't be, you know, too worried about, you know, displaying your personality and, you know, being a person, injecting some humor where it's appropriate. You don't need to answer just one word answers as well. You know, again, creating that rapport and conversation. You don't need to relay and verbalize and repeat what is on your CV and cover letter as well, because they've got your CV and cover letter. They don't need to know all the ins and outs of your career history, because they have that in front of them already. So that's something that can easily fall into that trap, but try not to. Don't make examples up. So yeah, for competency-based interview questions, people, you know, it can be done that they'll try to just think of an example or make up one or elaborate on one, but it's very difficult to provide an answer for something that is not real and it's not based on facts. And so really try to reflect and think deep and really think about real life examples that you've had, because it's much easier to talk about things that have really happened than make it up. You don't need, you know, revealing personal information in a UK interview is not appropriate as well. And I think, you know, Cheryl will go on to a bit more about what is, you know, cross-cultural differences. But, you know, things talking about your family situation, or again, you know, that you need sponsorship or your visa's expiring, you know, those are the kind of things that we come after you've been offered a job and, you know, you've built that relationship and the personal connection and they want you to work for them. So focus on communicating your value, your worth, and how you would do that job better than someone else. Being very opinionated as well. So being careful of how you're using English, it could be even, or how you're communicating what your opinions are or what your values are, and trying to be more diplomatic as well is, you know, it's more appropriate. So after the don'ts, do's are dress to impress, obviously. So even if it's, you know, it's an online interview, don't become complacent. Make sure that you're dressed as you would for a face-to-face interview, it will really say a lot about you. I think I read somewhere the other day, it's like 7 seconds it takes for people to make an impression, and impressions last. So you will feel better as well and more prepared if you are dressed professionally. Eye contact, which can be a little bit challenging online, I know, with, you don't know where to look, but just making sure that you're not looking, behind you or sideways, and just trying to make them aware that you are listening to them. So nodding your head and speaking clearly, smiling, and making them think that you are listening and you are engaging with them. So punctuality, Cheryl's going to cover more of this as well. So, in the UK, it's, being on time is being a bit early. So 5 minutes before the interview would start, you'd be expected to kind of be there waiting for them. And don't be late. If you're late for any reason, sometimes things happen, apologize, obviously, and excuse yourself for that. It's always, taking notes is something that you would probably do in a face-to-face interview. If you do them over a virtual remote interview, it can sometimes look like someone's looking at their phone. So tell them that you're going to take notes, so they'll know that you are doing that and you're not looking down at your phone, because I've noticed that it can look like that, but actually the person's taking notes. And make sure that you are staying positive again with your answers. Don't just say yes or no. So you want to be elaborating on your answers, and again, creating that rapport and discussion. So really, you want, interviews are a two-way process. So it's not that you're on trial and they're trying to catch you out and they're trying to trick you. They want you to do well. And so create, really trying to generate a conversation as the result of the interview. That is where the difference is between a good interview and a great interview. So that's the stage where you want to get at. So just to kind of finish off my side of things, this is actually it's a success story of someone I helped with interviews. So this is Dheeraj. So he's originally from Curacao. So he's an international student studying business studies and finance in the UK. And he needed to get a placement, and he was really struggling with his interview skills, and he was going for these competency-based interviews. So he really had no experience. He hadn't, of interviews, and also as a student, he didn't have a lot of work experience as well. So he was really, really good at, he recorded himself, he came for mock interviews, and then he took on the feedback, he implemented it. And he finally did get a placement with the Scottish Courts and Tribunal Service. So he couldn't attend today. He was going to attend just to share his story, but he kindly offered this piece of advice. So this is a quote from Dheeraj. And he said, most candidates prepare for interview answers using the situation, task, action, and result technique, but they miss out the last R, which is the reflection. And this is where you can provide a full answer. It shows to the interviewer that you look to better yourself and mitigate the chance for any probing questions. So he applied that extra R, and it really made a difference for him, and it made him feel more confident. But he put effort in, and really reflected a lot on his body language, the content of what he was saying, his own experience. He did all those mapping exercises, and he's done very, very good. So that's his advice to everyone else.
In other words, he really prepared well.
Yes, he did. He really did. And it was just taking on the feedback and implementing it really quickly, and going into the next interview, and not seeing the unsuccessful interviews as failure, but as learning curves. And it was his mindset as well, and keeping that positive mindset. And sometimes it can be as well, the interviewer can be not great. They can't, they don't bring out the most in the interviewee. So it's not just the interviewee that has the responsibility. Like I said, it's a two-way process, but he did very well. And so this is my recipe for a successful interview. I would say, know your why. So why have you applied for that job? What's your motivation? And that's unique to you. So every candidate will have a unique response to that. Research. Know how to tell your story, and tell your story in a positive way and relate it back to the job. Always be diplomatic and positive, be interesting and interested. So ask questions to show that you're interested in the interviewers or the company. That will get you noticed, it'll get you remembered if you've built that connection. Update your LinkedIn as well. So this is really important because interviewers will now go on your LinkedIn before they interview you, or maybe decide to interview you, and they will look on your LinkedIn, and that gives a very, stark impression about you as a professional. What's your photo like? How active are you? What have you put on there? Have you been bothered to update it? Does it mirror your CV, which it should? What do you say about yourself? So that's quite a key thing. Being personable and authentic, again, don't make up things. If you're going to try to be someone you're not, the chances are you're going to get a job that isn't a fit for you and you're going to be miserable. So don't try and please the interviewer. It's about you as well. And practice makes perfect, and it really does. Interviews are a contrived process. That's not a natural setup. So it's the practice, the preparation that will make sure that you're confident and you know your worth, and you're going to go in there and you're going to do the best that you can. And that's all you can ask of yourself. I do have a spelling mistake there, sorry. No C for practice. But yeah, and then just some follow-up resources for support. Glassdoor, Hayes.com is a recruitment agency, and they have a really good careers advice section. You can basically go on LinkedIn Learning. There's loads of tutorials and webinars. YouTube is great. You can just type in, interview skills for international candidates, and it'll, come up with lots of stuff. And hashtags as well, like following hashtags on LinkedIn is great. Loads of things will come up. And interview tips, interview advice, anything like that, you'll be surprised how much content is out there to help you prepare. So that's pretty much it from me, actually.
Bianca, that was an amazing presentation.
Stop sharing.
I think that is the most complete and thorough coverage of interview skills and preparation for interviews that I've ever seen.
Yeah, it's quite a lot there. It's quite overwhelming. So yeah, I don't expect people to digest everything right now, but
it's all very valuable information. So just to take a break before our session starts, why don't everyone just stand up and stretch, just get moving, and maybe, stretch your head and your neck. We sit at the desk so many hours, maybe, our neck and shoulders get kind of sore. And why don't you roll your shoulders and, just take a deep breath and let the air out. All right, shake it out. Okay, so we're going to start with my part now. Just give me a minute while I share my slides. And this is a very interactive session. So I think that what you could do, feel free to unmute yourself and also show your video if you'd like, because I'm going to ask you a lot of questions and I want your participation. This part of this webinar is more interesting because of your input. So please feel free to share. I'm going to ask you a lot of questions and you can just leave your microphone unmuted. So this is the part about cultural differences, right? Now, what do you think could be some considerations about the culture of UK interviews? What challenges do you see that are sort of maybe different from your own expectations or your own country's interview process? What do you think could be challenging or different about UK interviews? Come on, don't be shy. I can start by giving you one example and maybe then you can think of others. I think what challenges me about the UK communication style is the dry sense of humor. I don't always understand it. So if they happen to crack jokes in in the interview, I may not be able to laugh. I may not understand it. Okay, somebody says work ethic.
Work ethic, yeah.
Very different. And Bianca said communicating in a foreign language. Yes, if English is not your first language, this definitely will be a challenge. Right, so there could be many different things about doing interviews in different countries. Now, the thing about the UK culture, I would like to use this model to sort of demonstrate an easy and visually pleasing way to kind of grasp a lot of cultural values of different places around the world. This is called the Lewis model of culture. And Lewis was a famous polyglot. He's somebody who studied different culture for his whole life. He was a cultural anthropologist. He studied and worked abroad for, almost his whole adult life. And he came up with these three main types. And the first one is multi-active. Now, as the name may suggest, that means the people that are super active in conversation, they use hands and they gesticulate, they may interrupt each other, they show emotion freely. It's a discussion with a lot of changes in voice and facial expressions. They tend to be relationship oriented and family oriented as well. Very important for family values. Okay, and then we have the linear active types. And these are the highly logical planners, the ones that like to be methodical and follow the book and follow the rules. They're the ones that like agendas, they're the ones that like to write everything down, and they have lots of lists of things to do. And then finally, we have the reactive types. So reactive, as the name would suggest, means that they usually listen. These are the world's best listeners. They try to establish what the other person's position is, and then they pause and then they reply. So you can probably guess some of the people that come from this area of the world. They tend to be very respectful. Hierarchy is very important, and saving face is essential. Saving face just means saving the other person from embarrassment and also saving yourself from embarrassment. Now, these are the three main types. And now I'm going to show you the full model. This is the full Lewis model. And on this model, you can see the relative placement of many different countries that either fall on one type or in between two types. Okay. Now, where would the UK be? See if you can find the UK. Where's the UK on this model? Down there, right? So UK is highly linear active, okay? They are the ones that are pretty punctual. They like to keep to the agenda. In fact, here are some of the main characteristics of linear actives. Just take a minute and look at them. They like to plan. They do things in order. They're direct but polite when they communicate. They don't always show all their feelings. They like logic to back up any argument. Sometimes they're impatient. They're very job oriented. They're very results driven. I think these two things go together. They don't normally interrupt when you speak. They stick to facts, not too much body language. They like rules and laws and going by the book. They tend to separate work and social life. They do one thing at a time, finish it up, and then move on to the next, typically. And they're very punctual. Now, the important thing to remember whenever we talk about cultural values is that these are not hard and fast rules, right? I mean, we're not trying to put people in little boxes and say, okay, everybody from the UK behaves like this, right? Because that would be completely untrue. We have to remember that culture is relative to all of our life experiences throughout our time on this earth. And a lot of it has to do with, human nature. I mean, there's some common things to all humankind. And then there's the middle category, the cultural characteristics, which are kind of specific to the groups that you belong to throughout your life. And finally, the last layer, which is the personal layer. We are all individuals. So we are all slightly different, no matter what our upbringing is. Even if we have the exact same experience as a sibling, for example, we're all going to be somewhat different because we're all individuals. So important thing to remember here is that we are talking about cultural values in order to sort of have a starting point, right? And it's supposed to be a guideline. But the most important thing is to always remember that you need to look at the individual in front of you and not make judgments based on their origin, okay? So there are certain characteristics that belong to cultures as cultural values. So when you look at this, I'm just going to flip back to this. We can take this as a general guideline for group behavior and business attitude, okay? But again, it's relative to every individual's personal experience, all right? So since British people tend to be different things here, I've put on the left side that are sort of their main characteristics. And knowing that, how can we adapt and prepare ourselves to work with them effectively. So if you want to unmute yourself and just shout out the answer. So since British people tend to be highly punctual and time conscious, what should you do? So go ahead and either you can shout it out, or if you're feeling shy, you could put it in the chat box. Since you know that they're punctual and time conscious, what should you do?
I should not be late for the interview, for example.
Exactly. Pay close attention to the time. Show up 5 minutes before, because as Bianca mentioned, you know, you have to check your tech and you have to have everything about your situation correct and conducive to a good interview. Is the lighting appropriate? Sometimes, you know, they might be doing an online interview with you, but it's too dark and they can't even see your face, which wouldn't be good. So if you show up too late, then you're going to miss the chance to fix these things. All right, since they're direct communicators and they stick to a plan usually, what should you do to adapt?
I think you need to go straight to the point when they ask any question from you.
That's right. Thank you, Gozel. That's absolutely right. So listen carefully, answer directly, go straight to the point, but be polite as well. Now, if they ask you a question that you didn't understand or you need clarification, it's okay to ask politely for them to either repeat or give you more information about what they're looking for. Then, since British people tend to be reserved in nature, you know, they generally don't show all their feelings and they stick to facts. They don't like a lot of displays of emotion. What should you do? Come on, don't be shy. Shout it out. Come on. Any guesses? Do you want to help them, Bianca?
Not reveal too much personal information.
Yes, that's true. Keep some personal information to yourself. I see some other messages here. Yes, separate work and personal life. Absolutely, Daniel. Don't overshare personal information. Yes. Very good. I don't know what happened to my, oh, there it is. Okay. Respect their privacy. Don't pry for too much information. Don't ask personal questions. And yes, as you said, Daniel, don't share too much information about yourself as well. Try to keep some back for yourself. Then, since they tend to be very quick in office communication and they rely on written communication more than verbal, what should you do? Come on. How should you adapt to this cultural value?
I think we also need to write an emails on time when they're telling you for interviews or any kind of offers. So probably we need to be much more polite and reply them on the time.
Yes, thank you, Gozel. Absolutely. You need to be fast with your replies. If you don't reply right away, they might think you're not interested. So the general rule is within 24 hours or within the same business day if you can. Maximum 24 hours total. And, you know, just remember that they put importance on written communication. Did you want to say something, Bianca?
No, just Temi and Satkani are saying, yeah, be prompt and be right if the need, only write if the need arises.
That's true.
Be prompt with emails and reply quickly.
Yes, good points, everyone. Thank you. All right, so they're polite but direct and quite formal in behavior especially during the first meeting. So how should you be to match this cultural value? Any ideas? They're polite but direct and formal in behavior.
So go straight to the point, I guess.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Daniel. Go straight to the point. Anything else?
Sorry, I think there is there is an appropriate manners on the first meeting. So like the way how do we talk and the manners how we communicate with the interviewee.
Yes, absolutely. Very good. Be very aware of your behavior, how you communicate with the interviewee. That's right. Satranji says, be respectful and reciprocate the same directness. Yes, absolutely. So I think that's, whoops, okay, there we go. So yes, I just put my take on it here. Work on your understanding of polite question forms and apologize before starting my question. This is a common British thing to say. Sorry, could you just tell me about, this situation? All right. Since they usually talk and listen in equal proportions, what should you do to adapt? So it's kind of like a ping pong game. One person talks, the other listens. Then this person talks, the first one listens, and it switches back and forth like that. Rather than kind of a very active conversation overlapping the others, they kind of talk and wait, and then, listen, and then they switch. So what should you do to adapt to this? So it says, where, go ahead.
Sorry. So I think we also need to listen them before their question, and then we never should interrupt them while they are talking.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Gozel. That's right. Be conscious that you're actively listening. Don't be thinking about your answer for the next question, right? Listen very carefully, show them you're listening. You can use active listening techniques like nodding your head or saying, okay, yes, right. So you vocalize to show that you are listening and you're in the moment of what they're saying, and then wait and make sure they're finished before you start speaking. Very good. And since they're respectful of rules and laws and they're pretty process oriented, what would you do to adapt? So think about this in terms of procedures when you're applying for jobs. There might be the direct route, the correct way, or there might be the roundabout way. But, for the first impression, because they like procedures and they like the right way, there is a, process, then we should probably follow that process, right? So yeah, yes, thank you, Satrani. Understand the procedure and try to follow it. Yes. Try to reflect on things, says Tammy as well. Yes, very good. Know the proper procedures, go through the right channels, don't use shortcuts, and be transparent, right? So the important thing to remember is that we all come with our own cultural conditioning. We all come with an idea of what's right and wrong, or better and worse, but those perceptions are relative to our own experiences, and they may be different in another culture. They may be different ideas about what's right and wrong or better and worse, right? So the fact that it's different is, there are lots of differences around the world, and that's what makes the world a beautiful place, right? So we don't want to change who we are fundamentally inside. Like, we come with our own value system, and that's just as valid as anyone else's value system. But when we're in another culture, as they say, the old saying, when in Rome, do as the Romans, right? So that means we have to kind of just understand the culture that we're in and try to adapt. All right, so we'll move on. So some key points about communication and manners. There are some regional differences within the linear active style of British English. The Southern people tend to be indirect. They have a more polite way of structuring their speech. Northern, though, tend to be more direct. So keep that in mind, that there are regional differences. And Scottish people tend to be very direct as well. Would you like to comment on that, Bianca? Do you have any?
Yeah. Well, being Scottish, from a mixed Scottish background, I would agree with that. And I think in Scotland, people are very transparent, so they can come across, yeah, it's very direct, and there's a lot of humor injected and a bit of banter, we call it, you know. So if you're not used to that and you come from a certain background where that is not the communication style, you can be quite taken aback, I think, and it takes maybe a bit of time to get used to. But, you know, even in Scotland, you know, Edinburgh and Glasgow, there's differences in that. So the regional goes so on a micro level. But yeah, I would agree with that. Scottish people, they mean very well as well. They're very, you know, but it's just the style. It's that kind of banter, and yeah, it's quite in your face sometimes. So
Americans are also very direct. I mean, they're famous for this, and it can sometimes come across very harsh. Okay, so you want to try to be extremely polite and formal, even if you're not sure, I mean, where this person comes from and how their communication style is. It's always better to err on the more polite side, if that makes sense. Make sure your phone is switched off. It happens to everybody, but it would be very embarrassing if it rings during the interview, right? So just check and check again. Of course, as Bianca mentioned, wear nice business clothing, dress to impress. And asking questions. I mean, in some cultures, what I learned is that asking questions can be seen as disrespect, for one, or a sign of weakness, or a sign of lack of intelligence, like you didn't understand or something when you ask a question. But actually, in most places in the Western world, let's say English-speaking countries especially, we really value people that ask questions. We see that as a positive thing. We see that as a sign that you're thinking proactively, and it's a sign of intelligence, actually. So don't be afraid to ask questions, especially if they tell you ask a question. But just inject that little sorry right before, because British people like to say the sorry, could you tell me more about, you know, XYZ? And just to show you a different grammatical structure, I would like to point this out. You can use the indirect structure for questions. Now, didn't we just say that British like direct communication? Yes, they do. But for the actual questions, there is a structure. This is just the term of the grammatical structure. So it has nothing to do with the, you know, it's not saying that this is the British way. It's just a grammatical term. But it tends to be the way that British often ask questions. Now, direct questions are the ones that start with a question word: what, when, where, who, how, or a verb like are, is, will, can, etc. These are direct questions, and the answer is only a possible yes or no to these kinds of questions. And it sounds a bit abrupt, doesn't it? If I'm in an interview and I say, when does the position start? Well, it's a perfectly correct question, right? It's grammatically correct. There's nothing wrong with this question. But in the case of interviews, I would recommend using the indirect grammatical structure, which is, do you mind if I ask when the position starts? And see that it has a slightly different grammatical structure here at the end. All right. Now, the next one, are there any training opportunities as part of this role? Again, a perfectly fine question. It's a little bit direct. And what I would prefer is to start out with something like, could you tell me? Now, why the if is there is because this is a yes/no question. All right. Now, if I transform it into an indirect structure, could you tell me, starting, then I have to put if in the middle and then the rest of it. And this also changes the grammatical structure. Could you tell me if there would be any training opportunities with this role? So doesn't it sound a little bit sweeter in a way? It sounds a little bit more respectful as well. So the next one, what would be my main responsibilities? Would you please explain what my main responsibilities would be? And then who would I be reporting to? I would like to know who I would be reporting to. So just note the different grammatical structure. If you want to study it more, there's a link here which we can send you after the session. But the grammatical technique is called indirect questions. If you ever want to Google it, you can find a lot of, you know, articles and information, exercises and quizzes on this topic. All right, so when it comes to decoding British speech, there was an article written about translating what the British say and what they actually mean. And it was in this article that actually went viral a few years back. So just have a look and tell me what you think. Is it true? Have you noticed this? Any comments?
I like the one that is a very brave proposal. What the British mean, you are insane.
Now, yeah, I mean, it's kind of funny. It makes you laugh. This may be slightly exaggerated. I mean, let's say we have to take it with a grain of salt, right? But the idea is there that, you know, sometimes they're so indirect that they're covering up the real opinion, which they don't want to say and hurt your feelings in the moment. All right. Have you come across this situation where you weren't sure what a British person was actually trying to say? Has anyone had an experience with this? All right. So I think we'll move on. All right. So some of the interview etiquette, I'm going to start with the don'ts. All right. So as Bianca mentioned earlier, you don't want to show too many strong opinions since British appreciate the reserved approach. We want to avoid talking too long or too much. So as soon as you feel like you've finished your answer, you've said, you know, 3 or 4 sentences, you know, just bring it to a close and finish it off confidently. Yeah, as Bianca mentioned, also don't ask about pay or holidays. Don't show emotion or desperation. Like, we don't want them to know that we really need the job, right? Even if you really do want the job and you really need the job, you want to show, instead of desperation, you want to show enthusiasm for the company and their work, and, you know, being impressed by the actual company. Don't ask for the results. You just have to wait. This is how it is. It's a golden rule. You want to show confidence, but without boasting and bragging. So you want to demonstrate that you come from a place of strong values and that you're confident, self-confident, but try to get away from boasting. Don't forget about body language. Now, if you're used to moving your hands a lot, this is my problem. I think from years of being a teacher, I always gesticulate a lot. And I remember one time in the past, I had a British boss who I was having a conversation with him. I was very excited about something and I was moving my hands like this, and I saw his eyes going like kind of like following, and like he had big eyes and he was like following my gestures, and then he had this frown. And I still remember that, like, oh, I'm using my hands too much. Okay, I will just calm down now, right? Another thing, in some countries, it's considered proper etiquette and polite to sit with folded arms in an interview. So I know I saw this in India, Pakistan, some countries in Asia as well, in Korea. And it's very common to sit like this as a sign of respect and that you're giving control to the other, like I'm listening, you know, that kind of thing. But you definitely don't want to sit like this in a job interview, because in that situation, it might be seen in British culture, it might be seen as you're closed, you're afraid to talk, or you don't want to talk or share. So just keep that in mind. Keep an open demeanor, hands open, palms showing, and, you know, nice posture as well. All right, don't forget your PTE, please, thank you, and excuse me. These small, you know, gentle and polite, you know, interjections in your conversation will add a lot of politeness. And as Bianca mentioned earlier, try not to answer with just one word. So I'll give you an example. If an employer asks me, did you like your previous role? Like, did you enjoy your previous job? And, you know, that's a yes or no question, right? So you may think, well, I can only say yes or no, but you can develop, you can do what we say is answer and develop. So for example, did you enjoy your last position? I would say, yes, as a matter of fact, I felt I grew a lot throughout the course of that job, but it was time to move on. You know, so I would say yes, and then I would, you know, like a comma, and then continue on with my answer. So let me just check the chat. Oh yeah, George said the stiff upper lip, right? That's true. The British say this a lot, the stiff upper lip. All right, so a couple of interview tips. They're going to notice whether you're familiar with the company. So read and read and read, as Bianca mentioned earlier. Check the social media, and I'm going to tell you a little story about this. I once got a job because I happened to read an article that was written on LinkedIn by the person who was interviewing me. This is a true story. So I was trying to build rapport with the person who was interviewing me. And I had read up on the company. I even dug into the social media. I read the articles. I looked at the posts, everything. And I mentioned the article and complimented the interviewer on his writing in the interview, like as a side note, at the end. By the way, I read your article on organizational culture. I mentioned this. And I said, it's a really nice article. Well done. I just gave some compliments. And all of a sudden he smiled really big. And he hadn't smiled at all during the interview, just very serious face like this. And as soon as I complimented, I actually saw his teeth like, oh, thank you very much. And guess what? I got the job. So read the description again and again. Make sure your qualifications match and do highlight your talents. Don't be afraid. Don't boast, but just highlight. Just, make them aware that you do have talents that are relevant to the job you're applying for. Some things to keep in mind. Did you know that interviewers usually make up their minds in 120 seconds? That's 2 minutes. So this thing about first impressions really do count. It's true. So they usually make up their minds, and then the follow-up questions are to confirm the initial judgment that they made. And don't forget, as Bianca mentioned, they've already read your CV. So you're already halfway there. And then they see you physically and personally for 2 minutes. In that time, they've made up their mind. Okay, this person sounds articulate enough, confident enough, good enough communicator, had enough experience. I think it's a yes, right? And then the following questions are to confirm their initial judgment. Prepare 2 to 3 questions to ask. Don't forget to ask the interviewer at the end, as Bianca covered a couple of examples. Be prepared to talk about everything on your CV, even the smallest project. And for this, I'm going to share a story with you as well. So my husband was someone who also came to the UK from Pakistan, and he's now a UK citizen, but he first came in under the highly skilled migration program. And he says that his first job that he was interviewed for in the UK, the one that got him the sponsorship, was a job in which they asked him a question about a 2-month job project on his CV. It was only a 2-month project, but for some reason, that particular employer was interested in that 2-month experience, and they wanted the skill set he had developed in that 2-month experience. He was prepared to talk about it, and he got the job. And this is what got him the HSMP visa. So be prepared to talk about everything on your CV, even the smallest thing that you think, oh, they're not going to ask me, volunteer work or something in university. Oh, they don't care. It's only 2 months. Don't downplay it either. So if they ask you about it, oh, what did you do in this 2-month internship? Don't be like, oh, well, that was just learning. I didn't do very much. It was only a short thing. No, just speak just as positively and just as enthusiastically as on the smallest projects as you do on the bigger projects. All right. If you get hired, well done and congratulations. Once you're in, it's all about networks. So, try to be easy to work with and you'll keep getting jobs. Don't forget that recruiters do talk to each other. There's a thing called pub chat. After work, they all go out to the pubs and they may have a couple of drinks and start talking, and they do talk about, different candidates. So you want to make sure you have a good reputation. Now, about making recommendations for your friends, once you're in a company in the UK, it should be quite reserved and understated, and you should make recommendations only if there is a position open that somebody really fits for, okay? So in other words, in some countries, it's very common to send your CV to a friend and say, hey man, help me get a job, right? Well, in the UK, this would be not so appreciated. However, if there is a role that you know is open, and then you have a friend who you had a good experience with, you could state in a very understated way, I like this guy's work in that project. And if you'd like, I can send him your CV, So it has to be done in a more understated way. All right, just a word about working with agents. Is there a comment? Somebody saying something? No, okay. All right, so applying through agents. Now, it may often be the case that when you apply for jobs in the UK, there's an agent in the middle. So you want to remember that the agent is your liaison between you and the company. So you want to develop a relationship with your recruiting agent. Here's just a couple of big names. Remember that it might take 1.5 months to get to get an answer about the job. So be patient. In the meantime, you can get to know your recruiter and develop a relationship. Now they're going to follow up for you. So, if you have a good relationship with your recruiter, they can help you by contacting the employer. They also know about the trends that are going on in the field, in the industry, and with the specific employers. So they know when employers usually typically open up the hiring or, have new openings. So another thing is that, be aware of, the volume of the submissions that you have. Sometimes less can be more. So for example, if you submit to multiple agents and they submit to the same employer, the employer may, if he sees the same CV coming from 2 different agents, he may cancel it out because he doesn't want to cause any issues like conflict of interest between 2 agents. So be calculated about the jobs that you apply to, and also communicate with your recruiter so that you're aware and your recruiter is aware of all the jobs you applied to. Right. So I wish everyone the best of luck. I hope that this webinar was useful for you. And Bianca and I would give you one last chance to ask some questions. And if you're unable to stay, you can always contact us directly after the session. So I'd like to open up the floor now for anyone who wants to ask any burning question that's on your mind with